I'm trying to give people a way to do that, to build a foundation, to say, like, here's what we know, here's what people have said, here's what researchers are talking about, and here's what some of the elements that you may not have even considered. Things have happened through that have cost people jobs, it's cost people family, potentially people's lives. What's more important? Is justice more important than answering these questions that may be foundational to who we are as human beings? Will we be able to forgive some of the things that may have happened in order to keep the cover?
I'm a little bit of an anarchist, I guess, but I'd say YOLO. Okay, so our economies are messed up, but we are going to be in the face of a massive overhaul. And we're live. Hey gang, thank you for joining us again. My name is JT Erickson and I'm your host for No More Strangers. Today, I'm sitting down with Brian Anslinger. Brian is a longtime journalist and producer and executive producer. He cut his teeth in the Las Vegas market and is now the executive producer for KOIN KRCW's Everyday Northwest in Portland, Oregon. In addition to that, he is an adjunct instructor at Portland Community College, where he teaches a course on UAPs and the phenomena. This is really important to me because this is a space that I keep running up against in all of my conversations around spirituality, around consciousness. And it turns out a lot of folks in that space have experiences. And look, we've all seen this in the news. We've all seen this in movies and television shows. Real talk, we all love the X-Files if we're of a certain age. So I kind of want to cut through a lot of the shit. And Brian, thank you for sitting down with me.
It's great to be here, JT, in my home.
But your own home. Thank you for bringing me.
Yeah, no, thanks for stopping by. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I think this should be an interesting one. And gang, seriously, this guy knows his stuff. He's I think as close to an expert as one could hope to have in the space, other than like a Jacques Vallée or any of these other guys. But you've done your homework.
Expert is giving me too much credit. I think that, sometimes I don't know if there is such thing as a UFO or UAP expert, because this topic is so the breadth is wide, and there's so many elements to what we now term as the phenomenon or phenomena, anomalous experiences, and trying to whether or not they're connected or there is some link to consciousness, I think is the great question that maybe humanity is being put to the test to answer at some point down the road.
I like that framing of being put to the test, and something we were just chatting about is the way that the description of all of this has shifted over time. We used to have little green men in flying saucers. I think a lot of people have seen Mars Attacks, and that was sort of what people were expecting. Then it moved into little gray aliens, and then 17 races and galactic federations, and I don't know what to do with that information. We've evolved.
We have, and you're bringing up things that is interesting to me, because those are pop culture references, right? And you think about how pop culture shapes how we have conversations, and it's hard to argue that elements or franchises like Star Wars, Star Trek, the Marvel Universe, these are all, they're science fiction, fantasy type shows, franchises, stories that have penetrated our society at a level that I don't think we even stop to think about. That, it's tough to go through a day without seeing a reference to Star Wars.
It's hard.
It's very difficult. Star Trek is there too, and now with the Marvel Universe, these things are such a part of human consciousness, maybe more American consciousness, but also they're worldwide. You see Star Wars references, and Star Wars has certainly gone around the globe more than once. But that stuff shapes how we have a conversation around UAPs, and maybe not necessarily in the best way. I think it's, Little Green Men, that's as much a part of Close Encounters with the Third Kind, which
Right.
is, for a lot of people, that was a super impactful movie.
Right.
E.T., these, where that lingers with us to the point that, people kind of have made this judgment that what we're dealing with must be a species from another planet, must be creatures or beings from another world. And then, as more people come forward and you start to investigate this as I have, as many others have, study it, read different books, read different researchers, and they kind of lead you to this path of consciousness and this idea that maybe we're all having this shared experience, and what the phenomenon is presenting itself in such a way that we can maybe understand it as humans, or at least are not so fearful because we're dealing with something that kind of looks like us,
Yeah.
kind of, makes sense to us in a way that we can't maybe stomach the idea that something is here with us right now. It's been here with us for thousands of years,
Right.
which is what Carl Nell has alluded to. Others have kind of suggested that what we're dealing with something that's been here a long time.
Yeah.
Or pop culture has kind of led us to this road of like, or kind of treated us with like, oh, it's beings from another world. Maybe that's not what we're dealing with, but maybe that is a step towards understanding what is behind the phenomenon and what the phenomenon represents.
Yeah, and you bring up the elements of culture, and we can see how different societies approach the conversation, and we can look back at the historical record and see things that look a little strange. And at the same time, without that historical record, we seem to have something approaching a cultural amnesia around what the stories actually were around these. Outside of, we can see some stories in the Bhagavad Gita. We can see some aspects within different books of the Bible that, from our modern lens, make sense to us in different ways. The wheels within wheels, things that look like rockets in some of the old Indian texts. But nobody talks about them in modern times until probably the 40s. Weird things happened around 47, and we started to see a major uptick in that conversation, in sightings, all of that. Where I'd like to start is, well, the general. What actually caused you to move into exploring this space? And I wouldn't be shocked if it was a lot of the cultural phenomenon that we were describing. And also, you've had some fascinating conversations with people.
Sure. I mean, I think in the relative history as a journalist, I was in TV news for a very long time. And when the article came out in December 2017 in the New York Times about, black budget program, glowing auras, and that story was in Politico and Washington Post, and it kind of, at that point, I knew how much I had looked into this, how much I had studied it, read various books, watched interviews, and I kind of realized, like, okay, hey, this is a doorway, or at least the door is now open to write stories on this, produce stories on this, that isn't, where people aren't going to laugh at it. People aren't going to get, because like you can sit there and point, like it was on the front page of the New York Times. There's a Washington Post article about this. Brian Bender from Politico wrote about this. So I think that kind of led me to where I am today, ultimately teaching a course on this. But going further back, I mean, I think for me, it started like it does with a lot of people. You're a kid, you're maybe into science fiction. There's stories that resonate with you, whether it's like we referred to Star Wars or Star Trek, which certainly those were stories I enjoyed. And then it kind of, I think after that, I kind of kept running into the topic, whether it was conversations with my father or, conversations with different friends, or just kind of reading, being interested in it, reading, different terms. I got Above Top Secret somewhere in my teens, and I mean, there's so many incredible accounts in there that are very credible accounts from the 50s, 60s, 70s. And still, Timothy Good's work is still referred to, today as some of the best investigative work on gathering these kinds of stories. And so I think, like a lot of people, I started out thinking like, oh, this must be, what we're dealing with must be beings from another planet, aliens, whatever you want to call it, extraterrestrials.
Because that was our purview at the time. We were very entrenched in, we had rocketry coming in. We were really more interested in what was outside of the Earth's atmosphere and thinking they must be coming from out of here.
Sure.
Because they couldn't be coming from anywhere else.
Yeah. And I think what is interesting about this topic now is as you evolve into learning more and reading more, it kind of takes this turn towards consciousness, which is really strange. And I think before 2017, I would have told you like, it was definitely, what we're dealing with is definitely something from another world, another planet, creatures who developed like humanity, but maybe a million years earlier, maybe they're a million years beyond what our technology is or beyond our consciousness understanding. We didn't even use consciousness back then.
No.
But just something that's far more advanced than we are and has the ability, through physics or whatever, to come here and look at us, check us out, see what we're up to, find out why these, why we're so violent, whatever it is.
What's wrong with these
race.
apes?
Yeah, exactly. And now I think that is less clear. The extraterrestrial hypothesis, if you would, I think is a less clear answer. I'm not ruling it out as in talking about it, but I think that there's a lot of people who have come forward who've said like, hey, look, what we're dealing with or what we may be dealing with is something that's here. It's been here a long time, and then that's where kind of this clash of when whatever it is, when we kind of as a human race acknowledge that something is here. What form does that take? What does that mean to us? And exploring those questions kind of takes you down the road of who are we? Where did we come from? Why are we here? What happens when we die? My favorite question is, where were we before we were born?
Oh,
and and so these are things that like I didn't consider before that article came out, but now seeing all these credible people come out and talk about it. Some of them have done many podcasts, different, trying to explore and share more about what they know without crossing that line. That clearly there is a line about what they can talk about and what they can't talk about based on their government experience or their government knowledge, top secret clearance type stuff, if you would.
right.
And I definitely think it leads you to think that that consciousness is definitely a key element in this for us, and that there is some kind of a universal consciousness out there that maybe we don't quite understand how it works, how it fits into our reality.
Yeah.
But certainly the reality is, let's just say that maybe we're not experiencing all of the reality that there is out there.
That's a very common aspect of the conversation right now. And it's interesting to me that the 2017 releases were what sort of spurred you on even in that direction, because that doesn't seem obvious to me on its face, but yet I've ended up in the same spot through a different path in terms of having a lot of questions about where were we before we were born. I did not expect the conversation to go this way, Brian. I had that conversation with Dr. Palvanova at DOPS, and a lot of what she researches is, childhood pre-life memories before things stop being remembered, which opens up a lot of doors for a lot of questions that we're still I say we are still very early on in exploration, but I think when I say that, I mean more from the materialist approach of the exploration. There are absolutely people who have gone deep on meditation or have had very different experiences through out-of-body work, the like, who have been screaming this for decades. But I think we're just now starting to be able to listen. And it's fascinating to me, again, that 2017 release was something that opened that up for you.
Yeah, I think that it's a path. Yeah. And I think that's, when you're passionate about this particular topic. And, for me being in TV news, curious as to why, like, okay, well, this story, this 2017 story, when it broke out, it came with a couple of videos, a few years after the videos came out, and there were 3 of them. to the Stars Academy was kind of involved in some of this, releasing these videos, Christopher Mellon, Lil Zondo. So we kind of have the backstory there right now.
Right.
But then a few years later, the Pentagon came out and said, yeah, these videos are real. They're now, you can now go to their FOIA, the Navy's FOIA page, and you can download the videos there if you want. They're still up there. So there's this acknowledgement then at a federal level that, yes, these are real. These videos are real. We don't know what they are. And they were captured on Navy pilots, Navy aircraft, however you want to call it. And of course, then from there, we've had other stuff that's leaked out. It hasn't necessarily been, not all of it's been confirmed by the Pentagon or by, by intelligence officials or whatever. But you do have this effort now at the congressional level, at the legislative level, where there's been movement. There have been documents signed by presidents that have UAP release information. The National Archives has published incredible photographs and documentation. The CIA has put out stuff that was sent to them about the photographs and stuff they've gathered over the years. So now there is this, at the federal level, there are released documents, and take that obviously with a grain of salt, because people can obviously hoax images and send them to the CIA and think, oh, hey, however that's gathered. But at the same time, you do have a pile of evidence that we didn't have before, we didn't have access to before. The National Archives release is pretty incredible. You can spend hours going through what they've put out, and people have, and it's really fascinating. And then, as you start to expand beyond that sort of evidence, you kind of can, you're looking for more, like an explanation for like what really is going on. And I think there's that natural curiosity that we all have about, where is this from? Why are people, why are experiences so vastly different, but so many of them are very similar, So, and that's where I think, you kind of are like, well, let's listen to, I mean, for me, it was really, I listened to a podcast from Dolores Cannon.
Yes.
And, she's done work, she died like
big fan of
years
Dolores,
ago.
by the way.
She's very candid. And I think, her, and obviously hypnotic, regression is very controversial, but, she has in her books and in when she's appeared on stage and talked about it, like clearly she's connected the dots somewhere that, and when you set that aside and then think that like we all, and not all of us, but there's a lot of part of humanity that believes in the soul, the spirit, that like there is something within us that's a little bit more than our five senses, our human body, and mind, body, soul connection, if you would. That's like, okay, and then that takes me to that question we just had. It's like, where are you before you're born? And which I think that is a question that is a little easier to approach than what happens when we die, because people are uncomfortable about talking about death in most cases.
Yep.
We all know it's coming for us at some point. We're all going to expire.
We're not going to dodge it.
Yeah. And, but what happens after that? Well, maybe that's part of what the in-between is. And if you take what Dolores Cannon's research into account, and then you have people who kind of touch on that conversation, like the Jim Semivans of the world, who are saying that there's something, this phenomenon, whatever it is, there's a trickster element to it. It's just messing with us. And so that's where it's kind of like, there's no experts in this, because every time you sort of think like, oh, I really think there's something to this idea, this conscious idea and in between spaces. But then you think, why would something that is in that space also just mess with us for no reason?
Well, and there's a couple of things here that you're touching on, and what I think we largely see is, let's take the Dolores Cannon example of this. She has tens of thousands of hours of conversations on tape of extremely subjective experiences that we can't prove or disprove in most cases. And I think that's part of the reason that we now, when we have these releases coming from the government, we have assigned a certain level of credibility to the people that are recording this. So like Commander Fravor, we trust that man for reasons. right? Because he's been vetted through a process that requires a certain mental stability to be doing what he does. Other military witnesses, if it goes through our intelligence processes, for better or for worse, we trust them on these specific instances of the story. That also leads us to discrediting people who have experiences which we can't experience. And I think for the longest time societally, we look at them and say, I think Jim's having a psychotic break. How do we should lock him up. We should put him somewhere and get him the help he needs. And it's not because we dislike this person, it's because we're worried about them. And now with more of this evidence being brought forward, we even start talking about, and you were sort of hedging towards this, we start talking about what we would frame as disclosure. And you and I have discussed it a little bit. I swear everybody I talk to discusses it in very similar terms of sort of big D, hard disclosure, aliens landing on the White House lawn for a press conference. And also, if this was to happen in Russia, if they were to show up at the Kremlin or whatever they use now, oh God, I'm out of date. The FSB's headquarters, and Putin comes out. Well, we're not going to take that seriously. We're going to say that's AI. We're going to say we can't trust the Russians with this. So them coming to the White House only helps maybe 50% of the United States.
It's, disclosure is a interesting topic. I tend to lean towards, George Knapp when he was here for the McMinnville UFO Fest last year in 2025. And I've heard him say this before, but just that the people in charge of this, whatever it is, they're not going to give up the goodies. That's the phrase he uses. That implying that like the secret has been kept for a very long time, whatever that secret may be. And that getting to that is like, that's the line that will never be crossed. So, and of course, the idea of the White House coming forward and saying anything, we're in such a divided political state, which is ironic considering this particular topic is the one topic where there seems to be bipartisan agreement on.
We should all be aligned. But how do we trust who?
Yeah. But if the president came out and as rumored, there have been some rumors on social media. I have no way to, say any of them are unfounded or confirmed or whatever. Certainly, Ross Coulthart's been one who's said that he hasn't been able to confirm the rumors, but that there's allegedly a speech that's already written, and that maybe sometime in the summer the president is going to deliver a speech that's going to say UAP is real and we have videos and craft and now I tend to think that is a little bit of rose-colored glasses.
I think so.
And
a little hopium, maybe.
Yes. Yeah. I tend to think that the disclosure that is taking place through these former government officials and credible military witnesses is probably about as close as we're ever going to get.
Yeah.
And that it's going to be more of, if consciousness is involved, it's going to be something that Peter Levenda has alluded to, which is like, this is a dream, and one day we're going to wake up and realize we're part of a larger galactic or universal or interdimensional community. And that is what big D disclosure is going to look like maybe someday, and in the idea that we will all realize it at once, because the alternative could be terrifying and tragic. And Hal Puthoff has referenced this in some of the talks he's given. But back in the 90s, there was this group of leaders inside and scientists and researchers inside the government, inside the intelligence community, and representing vastly different parts of it, according to Puthoff. And they got together for a long weekend, and they broke down the different elements of what happens to civilization, to society in the United States, around the world, globally, if disclosure is brought forth. And they spent, hours talking, debating this particular, the pros and cons. And obviously, he's not getting into specifics, but you can imagine the economic impact. What's the cultural impact, the religious impact? And they came to a consensus that disclosure is not an option because of the disruption to stability in our current society. And I like when you look at everything and you think about what the potential impact is, it's hard to disagree with that particular topic. I know people will want, a lot of people want let's just get it all out there. But at the same time, like you say that, but what about, do you feel that way if you realize your 401k may disappear if you do that, or the markets tank because because we learned about a revolutionary new energy source that makes oil obsolete, which is certainly one of the claims that's been out there.
And that's been a claim for 50 years.
For 50 years, right? And so what does that do to our our home values, our society? Does that cause people to, in a snowstorm in Portland, when there's one coming, people rush to the grocery stores. They take this, the grocery store's empty. It happens in other cities
This happened 2 weeks ago in Dallas.
Exactly.
Right.
And like that's, the mob, if you would, the masses respond to things in a way that isn't always thinking rationally or intelligently. Yeah. It's just looking out for number one as soon as possible. And, if we're in that mindset when this happens, the potential for a tragic outcome is very high. And the potential for disruption at not only a city or a state level, but at a, nation level is high. And I think that is, I think that it is intelligent to consider that risk may be too much. Now, what does that mean for humanity?
Right.
I don't know. I think that maybe there is somewhere down the road, there is hopefully that when we're able to work out a lot of our differences, but we're still so violent towards one another and we still have, we still look for reasons to make war on one another for resources or other.
It's usually scarcity or ideology.
Yeah.
Right.
And the potential that maybe things like scarcity could be erased with a snap, maybe not the snap of a finger, but certainly 5 years down the road. If that idea isn't introduced very slowly and we aren't warmed up to it, the potential for a catastrophic disclosure, to borrow a term that's been used, is probably really high. And I think that's what I personally feel like that's what people who are trying to bring information out are trying to avoid.
That's where they're hedging. And there's a fascinating subtext to this, because the idea that this conversation was held at the levels that it was held is strongly suggestive of, well, there's something to disclose. And there's something that would cause this major catalyzing event in the experience of humanity that says there's something happening. What is it that they could disclose that would provide that sort of upheaval? And to the point you were making, the end of scarcity, a shift in energy dynamics and politics globally. At that point, I have to sort of ask the question, if most of our mindset is predicated, as sort of we were saying, ideology largely based on scarcity and material needs, and this would take us out of that. I'm a little bit of an anarchist, I guess, but I'd say YOLO. Let's do this. Like, okay, so our economies are messed up, but we are going to be in the face of a massive overhaul. And that catalyzing event presumably also enables what the kids like to call an awakening. And we start to elevate our consciousness to a degree that we can now look at ourselves. I'm one of those guys. Love matters. And we can stop having all of these squabbles. Again, I'm being an abject idealist here. Like, I won't sugarcoat it. And I would rather us move in that direction more quickly than it seems that we have been, again, for like 50 years, 60 years. When was Roswell? 47?
Yeah.
Like, come on.
Yeah. And maybe even further back than that with, one of the working theories is that when we started, dropping nuclear weapons, that seemed to attract a lot of attention to whatever this phenomenon may be.
Right.
And there's certainly a pattern of, according to, this is not me talking, this is according to a lot of officials and people who've worked on, nuclear sites, that there is a pattern of these things, orbs or, flying things showing up, flying lights showing up around nuclear facilities. I think that, look, ripping the Band-Aid off, you're not alone in that.
Oh, I know
assessment.
I'm not.
Yeah. And I think
I represent one cohort or faction of this construct.
Yeah. And certainly, people in the next generation that's coming up doesn't have, there is concerns about the American dream, right? Being accessible to people in their 20s, teens, 20s, 30s, even early 30s, that, maybe that's the generation that kicks the door open on this, where, the older generations are a little bit clinging to
Yeah.
our idea of retirement and our ideas of, that we've been taught, we were raised with by the baby boomers and whatnot.
Holding to
So,
the promises.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. So, and the promises that weren't given to everybody, just given to,
A subset.
yeah, a subset. And if you listen to people like Chris Bledsoe, who we kind of mentioned earlier, like he has, has written in his UFO of God book about this, in this 2026 revelation or awakening that's have a lot of people I think a lot of people misinterpret what he's trying to say as a prophecy. I don't think that's, and when you talk to him, I don't think that's, maybe that it comes across that way, but I don't think he necessarily thinks of it as that way. But certainly him and his family members who have talked about this have, really staked a claim that maybe there is an event or something that's going to happen that's going to awaken human consciousness in the future, where we do start to choose love first before we choose anger or violence or something worse. Let's hope that something like that is in our future, because I think the alternative, where we continue to choose violence over love or anger over love, is or over things like empathy and understanding that there's people out there who, particularly in this topic, who are going through things, they're experiencing things that some of them have positive experiences, but some of them are really terrible. Some of them, it leaves them frightened for decades of their lives.
It does.
To go to sleep or turn the light out and be in the dark. And there's no support system in our community for people who are experiencing that, because we're more likely to send them to the loony bin, if you would.
If we still had those.
If we still had them.
Those went out of the way in
Yeah,
the
and I
80s.
mean, that's a larger conversation, right, about the lack of mental health support within our society, within our communities. But, certainly you have people who are experiencing something that, yes, there's going to be a fraction of experiencers who may be experiencing a mental health crisis. And I don't want to dismiss that as a very serious issue. But you also have people who are they're normal people who are living their lives, and they experience something. Maybe it's a one-off, maybe it's something from their childhood that bubbles back up, but they don't have anywhere to turn, because anybody in their family that they talk to about this dismisses them. Friends think they're crazy.
That's just Brian.
Nobody wants
He's
to
the UAP guy. That's just JT. He's the psychic weirdo.
That there is, and that for most people, it's easier to dismiss it than really sit down and think about it. But when there are groups here in Portland, and there's groups around the country that meet, and they're groups of experiencers, and they talk about this stuff, and they share what's happening with them very in deep personal ways.
Yeah.
And when you meet with these groups, you also run into people who don't have anywhere else to turn. So they come to one of these sessions, and they're trying to, without getting into specific details, they're trying to express what happened to them or what they're experiencing. And they finally have a place where they found support to acceptance. And I think that as a society, and even in our communities, we have to find a way to provide space for people who are experiencers, people who are going through something that maybe somebody who, the average person isn't going to be able to understand, but certainly we have support for them to work through whatever they're working through. And that may come through a version of a mental health support system that we don't currently have, but need to, at some level put into place. But my heart really, you talk about why I decided to get into teaching or this topic, and the stigma around that stuff. Once I started talking to people about what they're experiencing and asking them questions and learning about who they are and what they've gone through. And these are people who, teenagers to people in their 70s, who have had very similar experiences, some very dark, some very positive, but there's no place in our general community for them they have to go seek out others online in different groups, to find others who are going through what they're going through, or dealing with what they're dealing with. And like if we're going to find out or figure out what's going on, what this phenomenon is, we have to find a way to support those people and understand and learn from them to fill in little pieces of the puzzle. Because, there's clearly the people who come from the military or intelligence community. There is this idea of that there is this threat or over.
Absolutely.
And like from their perspective, I think that is a logical.
I'm fine with it.
And there may be, like, I don't know, but certainly there is some of that. But there is also people from the other side who think that, whatever we're dealing with is just positive and has, the best for humanity. Whatever the answer is, like, we need to get to it. And I think that accepting experiencers and just reducing that stigma that comes with people who share about stuff, reducing that is the only way we're really going to figure out what is going on, because those stories are important, and piecing together what the answer is and the many, many pieces for the average person who is interested in this. I think that's necessary to hear those stories and try and get an understanding and wrap our minds around it.
And for those who have experiences or have claimed experiences, being able to talk about it is excessively valuable. And I don't know whether or not the answer is to have an organized, government-sponsored, government-sanctioned approach to having this conversation. And I don't know that I would necessarily trust it if it did. Again, sorry, I have my leanings. And we do see a lot of grassroots organizations coming together. You mentioned there are groups here. I've spoken with people who have groups where they can have these discussions in different cities. I think that's a good thing. I think to the point that you're making, there is that lack of support to the mental health crisis aspect of it, where some of these people definitely saw something, my opinion. So I'm going to say definitely. And there are definitely people in mental health crisis, and I don't know how to identify which is which. And I don't know that there is enough dedication on the mental health support side to support that. It really, we could go back and forth on this in a circle for hours, and it's important because so many people that I talk with in so many different areas of phenomenon experiences between UAPs and contact or spiritual encounters or other events where they find themselves going out of body. They have nobody to talk to about it.
Yeah.
And I have this conversation 2 to 4 times a week where I'll talk with someone and they'll say, "Oh my God, nobody will listen to me. I can't talk about this with anyone." And the gratitude they have when just one person will listen is worth everything.
And on the flip side of that, when people find out that you are having conversation about that, a lot of them share a story
come to you
that they've never shared before.
Yes.
Because they've been too afraid.
Constantly.
And I mean, you think about, let's step aside and think about that for 1 second. I just mean within this conversation of someone experiences something, it's very shocking to them, perhaps even painful, mentally, physically, whichever way, and they hold it in, they keep it in. It's such a unusual and frightening experience. They're afraid to tell anybody about it. Like, when you think about that in that, just that single sense, it's like that's awful. That's terrible. Like, I'm so empathetic for people who are going through that like, that is just, no one should be left. None of us should be left in a situation like that.
We're already isolated in our bodies. Like, let's not make it worse.
Yeah. And then you come on the concept that we're all connected in some way, maybe we're all in this together as it is. And that we need to have some empathy for people who, a way for those people to come forward and share their story and not feel like they're an outcast. That's the only way we're going to find the answers that we all seek, which are real basic answers. Again, they're all basic answers for humanity, which is where do we come from? Why are we here? What is my purpose? I mean, these are all questions that, have been discussed for eons. Maybe we're closer to those answers than we've ever been. And that's exciting.
As far as we know.
Yeah. But it's also like, we still have to take care of each other if we're gonna get there, and be a little bit more, choose love over fear.
And the way you said it, I think it has to be that empathetic response, because there is the flip side of it where there is an exploitative response, and we see this everywhere too. You can find any number of YouTube videos of people interviewing people in the middle of a mental health crisis, and it is just to, like, there are people that are very empathetic when watching it, and then there are the people talking a lot of smack about, look at this crazy person. And I guess all of that will continue to exist, but leaning a very specific direction here.
It's social media it's both been,
It's amazing.
It's amazing. And it is like the best and worst of society at the same time. And I think that it's another place where I don't know what the answer is there. Certainly, this topic has been discussed. There are spaces, X spaces every day where people are, dozens, if not over 100 people will gather in X space and talk about different elements. But then the concern becomes, for me, is like, well, how do you, if someone's new to this topic, you're kind of new, you kind of new to this.
New adjacent.
I've been talking about this for a while. Or looking into it for a while. But the reason I started, beyond just my wife saying, why don't you teach a class about this? One of my motivations is to help people who are just now being introduced to this topic and don't have, if you just hunt out on social media, you look on YouTube, like there's the wide range of just information, and not all of it's good. Not all of it is worth your time. And I'm trying to, through my class, give people a foundation to sort of stand on when it comes to discussing this topic if they have an interest in it. And certainly in my class, I've met people in their 20s who they saw the hearing with David Grush, and all of a sudden that, like, my God, there's something to it. That launched their interest in it. And you think about, for me, I'm almost 50. I've been looking to this topic for better part of 3 decades, and then being able to write stories about it and report on it and that sort of thing. And then someone who's brand new coming to it, it's like, oh my God, I want to learn as much as I can, but there's like so much out there.
There's so much.
How do you, and so I'm just trying to filter it down to a way to give people an idea of, like, okay, well, here's what happened since 2017.
Right.
Here's some of the people who are saying really smart things and are really positive researchers to look at. Here's why we can't always trust the videos that we see. I mean, particularly now, you brought up AI. Like, it's really hard to trust anything we see video-wise or photographically. So how do you determine, what is, or are you able to determine something that is like a true video or true photo? And then you have the concept that we've kind of gone over of consciousness and psionics and psi abilities and remote viewing and these other like kind of fringe on the UAP topic that are certainly appear to be related in a way that some people have connected, right? But what is that? What does that mean, and how do you integrate that into your fundamental understanding of overall starting on this topic? So, through my first course, through about 6 classes, I kind of went through all those things systematically with a slide presentation and using clips from different different hearings,
right?
Different people talking about particularly military intelligence. Diana Walsh-Pasulka, who's a great researcher on this.
She's cool.
She's great, and but she's really thoughtful and she's approachable, and I think that's so important. She comes from that religious studies background, which I think is so key. That, like, she was looking at religious studies, and that's how she got into the UAP sector, and or learn the UAP topic is go through that. So I think that there's, for someone new coming to this, it's just trying to figure out, like, I want to learn as much as I can because I'm positive, or I'm passionate and interested in this topic. I'm trying to give people a way to do that, to build a foundation, to say, like, okay, like, here's what we know, here's what people have said, here's what researchers are talking about, and here's what some of the elements that you may not have even considered, the woo that comes up, that is out there, that appears to play a role, but we're not quite sure how much or how little it is. And then in the middle of all that is, like we're talking Jacques Vallée and Jean Kiel, who have this idea that like maybe what we're dealing with is something that I'm not paraphrasing here, but I'm using my interpretation, is like maybe we're dealing with something that perturbs humanity for some reason, that it flicks us and pokes us. It's trying to get us to move in some sort of a direction, whether it's spiritually or mentally or however you want to phrase it. And the way it interacts with it chooses different ways to interact with us that is sometimes scary and frightening or sometimes positive and uplifting, but it's for a greater purpose that maybe we don't understand until we're on the other side of what this is, what life is.
So it sounds like when you are teaching the class, you're really starting things at 2017 where we have some more grounded conversations. What would you say, to somebody that's looking to move into understanding this space a little more thoroughly, or just even a baseline depth? What would maybe baseline sources be that you would recommend that they go look toward? You had mentioned, the congressional hearings. You've mentioned Diana Pasulka. We've had a little bit of a conversation about Chris Bledsoe, who definitely want to talk more about him.
Sure.
What would you say like the foundation would be for that conversation?
I mean, I think the easiest entrance is actually Pasulka's book, American Cosmic. It's such an excellent read, and it's a very soft entry point into this topic where it's, you have, obviously Gary Nolan has come out and said that, he was identified as one of the, characters that in the book that Pasulka was hanging out with.
And she also has another unidentified
collaborator. There's been identified out there. I'm not going to say his name, but
has it?
Oh yeah.
Tell me off.
I think that telling of what she experienced, the giving field that they kind of explored, and just that gives you for someone new into the topic, it allows your mind to open up a little bit to what UAP may be, and that there may be these things colored in our history that were interpreted as miracles or interpreted as something spiritual, that now, for whatever reason, we interpret those as UAP or UFO sightings. And then, after that, I would say, watch the congressional hearings, like watch them. And because the testimony from Grush and Fravor and Graves, when that first big one came out, or that was the second one, but like those are clearly men who are credible, of high standing, that they're not out there making stuff up. They're members of the military, aviators. I mean, these are some people who, as a nation, we've invested millions of dollars training to do their job. Grush was briefing the president. I mean, his resume is impeccable. So these are legitimate, credible witnesses.
Right. I was going to say, this brings us right back to who is credible. And I think you're exactly describing why we place that credibility in them.
Exactly. And, and then you have, there were a couple other hearings past that, Luisa Elizondo and Mike Gold from NASA, and, these officials who, and there was a journalist involved in there too, their testimony, like they didn't come to that, like to open up like that in front of, cameras and a packed gym room and members of Congress. And then you look on the other side of where you have Congress, which is bipartisan in this topic. And like how divided our country is politically. Like this is one topic where Republicans and Democrats seem to have an agreement. Now, I personally think that is probably as much to do about following the money as anything else. But I certainly think there is passion in getting to the bottom of what's actually going on and what's been hidden and why. And then that brings you to, one of the things that Lou Elizondo has talked about, which is this idea of amnesty, that like, if we're dealing with a legacy program that's been in place for many decades, going back 80 years, like things have happened through that have cost people jobs, it's cost people, family, potentially people's lives. So there's going to be things that happen that we're all going to look upon, and if everything was equal, we'd be like, that person or that company needs to be destroyed or demolished, or or that person needs to be thrown in prison. But that idea is never going to get us to the answers. And so it becomes, what's more important? Is justice more important than answering these questions that may be foundational to who we are as human beings? And that is still a question that remains unanswered, because even in some of the groups that I meet with, people are split on what's more important. Some people are like, we need to, if they lied, they cheated, they did whatever, they need to be punished to the highest extent of the law, but that's never going to get us to the answers. We're never going to know, what really happened if we take that approach. I'm not saying one way or the other. I don't know what the right answer is, but certainly from former government officials' point of view, some of them, the only way to get the answers that people seek is through saying, okay, we're going to forgive these things that happened because that was a time and place and happened during the Cold War.
Nobody knew what to do with it.
No, exactly. And so if we are able to, as Americans, because I think that's really the key to this. This is an American issue, at least this particular one, to say, all right, we're going to forgive these individuals and these organizations and these companies or branches of government, whatever it is, and say, we want the answers. Maybe we start to get closer to the answers, and then we're building more support for whistleblowers, and we're building that framework. And I think at some level that is taking place, but that big question of, will we as Americans be able to forgive some of the things that may have happened in order to keep the cover on this alleged, issue? I don't know what the answer is there, and we may never get an answer.
And the way you're framing it actually, I think, speaks to something that does need to be considered. And I don't like that this is part of it, but it's reality as we know it. You mentioned that part of this was occurring during the Cold War. We're not exactly not in a Cold War right now either. So there is that national defense, national security conversation to be had as well. If we tell the people that we are ostensibly at loggerheads with, China, Russia, whomever else that I can't think of off the top of my head that doesn't like us.
Non-state actors, I suppose.
Non-state actors.
Is a probably a good term.
Oh boy, yeah. Who may also have their own programs, their own retrieval programs, their own development in technology based on this stuff. If they know what we have, what does that do? Like now are we saying, look at this giant stick we have, everybody back off? But if we don't know what they have, they're like, oh, we got you. We're not afraid of you anymore. And that comes back down to that paradigm that we were describing around scarcity and security.
Yeah.
And how do we approach this? And maybe that's part of the reason this is going so slowly.
I think it definitely is a likely possibility. I certainly, based on what we've heard, and to point out, like a lot of these are allegations, and we've heard from different officials, and people can go back and they can watch Carl Nell talk about non-human intelligence and things like that. But the idea that we're in some sort of a race with China and Russia for breaking through the technologies that have been recovered, whether you call it non-Earth origin is one of the terms, or non-human origin technology, and what does that
what does that mean?
What does that even mean?
Yeah.
I think, how would we feel if China or Russia does disclosure, or are we dealing with some sort of mutually assured destruction type agreement
again?
Where it's like nobody, right? Where it's like, okay, officially we're not talking about this, but unofficially back channeled, nobody's going to come out and say this, because, just as disruptive as it would be if the White House did it, it might be equally as disruptive if Russia did it or China came out and those military officials came out. So, if the status quo is what is desired most,
right,
above all, then it seems logical that you wouldn't necessarily have those people have that official big D disclosure at those levels.
Yeah. I keep thinking what if we aren't the first to disclose? What do we do?
Yeah.
And we touched on it like an hour ago, but conceptually this is such A lot of people might think this whole conversation is a waste of time, but I think it's one of the more important conversations we can be having, because it is touching, at least it seems to be touching, as you, I think, appropriately brought up, some of those fundamental questions about who are we in this human experience. I have a couple more questions that I'd really like to go into a little bit.
Sure.
Mike, brother, this one's from you. He wanted to know, and I think it's a fair question, and I hear it discussed. What if this technology is actually stuff that is ours, that it isn't from somewhere else, and that this is, you hear conversations about bottlenecks being put on physics, on where people are studying, and papers stop being published about certain topics, gravitics. Some of the plasma research has gone dark. Why? And could things like the Tic Tac be something that we actually produced? And this is another form of a softer disclosure of what we actually have as capabilities.
I think that's certainly a possibility. Eric Weinstein, PhD,
Talks about this.
He talks about this, about the idea that it just appears that there was a branch of physics that kind of vanished in the
and they
50s
gave us string theory.
Yes, yeah, and that's been the dominant,
right,
for physics for a long time. I think that there's my perception is that whatever we see, right, whatever technology that we see in currently out there, that there's research and development that is decades beyond that. And, now what does that mean for, like say discovering an energy source or basically figuring out how to defeat gravity in a sense? When you frame it in the sense of the Cold War, certainly I think there's a good argument that, like, if we know how to do this, we certainly don't want to disclose it or come out with it, only to find out that the Soviets, our main adversary / enemy, figure out how to do it too, because they've got a bunch of smart scientists. So, so I can see both the pros and the cons of doing that. And then here we are decades later, which is like, okay, but like, look, I was promised a flying car back in the mid 80s, with
man,
future.
I really thought we'd be there.
Yeah.
Man.
But, so yeah, I think that there's certainly this idea that, or the potential that we're, for decades, we've been, I say, but like intelligence community or military industrial complex, aerospace companies have used UFOs and UAPs as a nice little umbrella to allow them to operate in, in spaces where the technology that they're using is beyond what we, most of us think is possible.
Right.
But through their research and development, they've cracked the code, so to speak. Or, some people allege, or through, help from other, beings, races out there in the galaxy that may have come here and, crashed or landed or whatever, allegedly, right? So I think that there's something to that. Again, it falls under that, like, if they've got the goodies, we're never going to see them.
Mm-hmm.
And, but there's also, I've also read, you read all sorts of stuff on social media, but there's also people who say the big, or I've also read stories from people who claim to work inside these industries where the joke is that we've always got the hammer, the ace, that like whatever our adversaries can come up with, we've always got something that, like, if push came to shove and we had to use it, this is the trump card that would ultimately, topple or whatever we needed it to do. But again, it goes back to, like, maybe there's this agreement at an unofficial level that, like, okay, well, we're not going to use our stuff, but certainly, and then you go back to the stars and Tom DeLonge and some of the people that he's connected with, where he kind of, through his fictional storytelling and his, well, maybe that makes it easier to accept the reality. And then it goes back to the very first thing we talked about pop culture with Star Wars and Star Trek and, the movies that came out in the 50s. And maybe maybe the last, 60, 70 years of science fiction and cinema and stories, maybe part of that, that we're influenced. And certainly if you look at Gene Roddenberry and his, like how Star Trek came to be and this idea of a galactic federation that also pops up by defense officials mentioning it in Israel and
it's showing up a
Canada.
lot lately.
So, maybe, like this is a maybe.
Maybe
there is something influencing pop culture to help humanity understand our role in the universe and our role in the galaxy and the role maybe in our own solar system. And I don't think if that is the case, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, because fiction allows us to approach topics in a way that, if something was classified, you couldn't talk about it. But if you write it in a book and it's a story,
right?
Maybe you're able to sort of softly disclose something.
Little breadcrumb, getting rid of that negative connotation that we always hear around predictive programming.
Yes, and certainly Tom DeLonge and his, through the WikiLeaks stuff, we were able to see like he was connected to some pretty high up people, John Podesta, and he's clearly been able to connect with some people inside something, whatever this, apparatus, military or whatever, that have given him theoretically some stories to tell.
That's, I think, the important piece to keep in mind. Like, he's not the only one who's come to these conclusions through the work and the conversation and going deep and then having deeper conversations with better informed people. And we can all start to work our way up that ladder a little bit. And I think that's what you're trying to do in your own way. And that's definitely what I'm trying to do right here with conversations like these.
Yeah.
So serious appreciation, Brian.
Of course.
Gang, this has been awesome. I really hope you guys enjoyed this. I'm going to talk to you more about this tomorrow.
Sure.
Brian, thank you very much.
It's been pleasant.
I appreciate you, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gang, have a great one. Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you in the next episode. All right, gang, that's it for today's episode. A huge thank you to Brian Anslinger for taking time to sit down with me. He was incredibly generous to invite me into his home both for the interview as well as the Super Bowl the next evening. Finding community is so important to me, and meeting Brian has been a gift. Of course, thanks to Team NMS, Anna the Wild Orazan, and Emily Rivers. The show wouldn't exist the way that it does without the two of you. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and comment on the show wherever you are, and please share us with a friend. It really helps us grow and bring on even more incredible guests like Brian Anslinger. You can also follow along on Instagram at No More Strangers Podcast to keep the conversation going. Lastly, thank you again for tuning in. And until next time, take care, keep exploring, and as always, I hope that you now have one less stranger in your life.